A whale's body looks made for open water. No visible hind legs, nostrils on top, a tail that drives several tons through the sea. Yet buried across Pakistan, India, and Egypt is a stranger history. The earliest whales still had feet that carried weight on land. Their descendants became amphibious hunters, then swimmers that returned to shore to give birth, and finally, animals that could never walk again. Bones preserve almost every major step. The wildest part is how quickly it happened. Roughly 10 to 12 million years transformed shoreline mammals into rulers of the Eocene Sea. The trail begins about 53 million years ago, near the ancient Tethys Sea. Northern India and Pakistan held rivers, estuaries, mudflats, and warm coastal shallows. Pakicetus lived beside those waterways. It did not resemble a modern whale. Its body stood on 4 functional legs, and its long skull sat at the end of a land mammal's frame. Early fossils were first recognized from pieces of skull found in river deposits. One structure inside the ear identified the surprise. Pakicetus belonged to the earliest cetaceans, even though most of its body was still equipped for land. Pakicetus also reveals what had not changed yet. Its ears transmitted sound largely in the manner of terrestrial mammals. Underwater, that system would have struggled to determine where noises came from. This was no miniature dolphin listening beneath the surface. It was an early whale near the starting line, feeding around rivers and coastal margins while still hearing a land-based world. Later, cetaceans would isolate the ear region from the skull and channel underwater vibrations through the lower jaw. The transformation of whales was therefore not just about legs. Their entire sensory world had to move underwater too. Then, a deer-sized animal named Indochus complicated the story. It was probably not a whale itself, but a close extinct relative from the even-toed ungulate branch. Its ear contained the thickened involucrum, considered diagnostic of cetaceans. Its limb bones were unusually dense, helping reduce buoyancy like natural ballast. Chemical isotopes in its teeth also point toward habitual time in water. Indochus may have waded or hidden beneath the surface rather than swimming like a whale. Suddenly, whale ancestry looked less like one heroic leap and more like repeated experiments along a dangerous shoreline. The next experiment could move through both worlds. Amphibious, whose name means walking whale, lived around 48 million years ago. It had powerful limbs, large feet, and a flexible spine. On land, it probably moved awkwardly, but could still support itself. In water, its feet could paddle while the back flexed to add thrust. Scientists reconstruct this from the proportions of its limbs, pelvis, and vertebral column, not from preserved swimming behavior. Amphibious was no seal-shaped modern swimmer. It was a heavy amphibious whale caught between walking, paddling, and undulating through warm coastal water. That mixed design did not remain fixed. Protocetid whales spread through marine environments while retaining different degrees of movement on land. Their forelimbs and spines became increasingly useful for swimming, yet some pelves still connected firmly enough to the backbone to bear weight. Their nostrils had begun shifting backward from the tip of the snout. This was the opening move toward a blowhole, not the finished structure. Evolution did not relocate the nose in one jump. Across successive skulls, the breathing entrance crept rearward while the body spent more of its life beyond the shore. But one tiny bone finally exposed the family secret. In 2001, protocetid fossils including Pakicetus and archaeocetes were described with remarkably complete feet. Their astragalus, an ankle bone, had a double pulley shape characteristic of even-toed ungulates. Whales were not descendants of the wolf-like mesonychids once favored by many anatomists. They belonged inside the same broad mammal branch as cattle, deer, pigs, and hippos. Molecular evidence had pointed that way. Now an ankle carried the fossil smoking gun. The largest ocean animals on Earth came from ancestors with unmistakably ungulate-style feet. One protocetid preserved something even more personal. A Mayacetus fossil from Pakistan contained a near-term fetus. The fetus was positioned head first, the usual orientation for land mammals, rather than tail first, as in living whales. The specimen therefore supports the conclusion that Mayacetus still came ashore to give birth around 47.5 million years ago. That inference rests on one extraordinary fossil, and unusual burial movement was considered by its researchers. Even with that caution, the evidence presents a vivid halfway life. Adults could forage at sea, but reproduction still pulled them back onto land. Mayacetus could not remain tied to shore forever if whales were to conquer open water. Later, archaeocetes show the connection breaking. Pelvis became detached from the vertebral column. Hind limbs shrank and stopped carrying the body. Propulsion shifted toward the spine and tail, although soft tissue flukes are rarely fossilized and must often be inferred from vertebrae. Forelimbs flattened into steering surfaces. Once birth also moved into water, there was no necessary return to land. A mammal lineage that had entered the shallows for food or safety had crossed an anatomical point of no return. Yet becoming aquatic did not instantly create modern whale senses. Eocene skulls show the ear region becoming increasingly isolated, reducing interference from vibrations traveling through the skull. The lower jaw developed a pathway that could deliver sound toward the ear, likely involving acoustic fat in life. Some archaeocete skulls also show asymmetry associated with directional hearing, but these whales were not necessarily echolocating like later toothed whales. True active biosonar arose afterward within Odontocetes. First, whales had to solve the basic problem of hearing clearly in a medium far denser than air. Breathing changed in parallel. In Pakicetus, the nostrils remained close to the front of the snout. In later amphibious whales, they sat farther back. Fully marine archaeocetes carried them still closer to the top of the skull, shortening the movement needed to expose the airway at the surface. This sequence records the beginning of the blowhole, though modern arrangements evolved later in separate whale lineages. Every shift affected the skull around it. Feeding, breathing, and sensing had to keep working while the face was remodeled. Evolution could not pause the animal while moving its plumbing. By roughly 41 to 34 million years ago, basilosaurids and dorudontines had become fully marine. Their reduced hind limbs could no longer walk, and tail-driven swimming powered their bodies through offshore seas. Some retained tiny external legs, but these were evolutionary leftovers rather than terrestrial equipment. Their elongated or streamlined forms were recognizably whale-like, though they lived before modern toothed and baleen whales diversified. The transition had reached its decisive payoff. A lineage that once stood beside rivers had become physically committed to the ocean, with no functional route back onto solid ground. Nowhere displays that ending more dramatically than Wadi Al-Hitan, Egypt's Whale Valley. Today it is desert, but during the late Eocene, this ground lay beneath a warm sea. The site preserves dense assemblages of basilosaurids and dorudontines, sometimes with much of the skeleton still arranged in place. Reduced hind limbs sit beside long vertebral columns built for swimming. UNESCO recognizes the valley for its exceptional record of whale evolution. South Asia preserves many earlier shoreline stages. Egypt reveals the marine result. A vanished seabed became a stone archive of animals that had abandoned land. Fossils provide the anatomy, while molecules identify the living family connection. Genetic and morphological studies place hippopotamuses as the closest living relatives of whales. That does not mean whales evolved from modern hippos. Both lineages share an older ancestor. Rhoelids, such as Indochus, are generally treated as the closest known extinct sister group to cetaceans, although their exact placement can vary between analyses. Together, ears, ankles, isotopes, skeletons, and genes tell a consistent story. No single fossil carries the whole argument. The power comes from independent clues converging on the same journey, and the ocean giants arrived much later. The Eocene transition created fully aquatic whales, but extreme baleen whale gigantism arose only within the last few million years as ocean conditions changed and prey became concentrated. First came the essential transformation: land hearing to underwater hearing, weight-bearing feet to reduced hind limbs, front-facing nostrils to an airway moving toward the skull roof, and shore-bound birth to permanent life at sea. Whale evolution was not a sudden plunge. It was millions of small workable steps until walking itself disappeared. Which fossil step surprised you most?